Do you ever think it was a mistake to immigrate from Russia?
No, never. Not once. It's it's tragic, of course, to immigrate, but I never thought it's a mistake because at the time it was really difficult to live in Russia. Hopeless, a hopeless situation economically, politically. So I really wanted to immigrate. Once my husband said, "What if we don't get a permission?" I said, "I will just crawl to the border." Just escape. I don't know how, but I couldn't imagine being there at the time.
And what year was that?
We applied in 79, which was the very end of this Jewish immigration, which started in 72, 73, and it was already a bad time. They closed it, they stopped it, and from 79 we had to wait until 81, and I sort of knew if we just sit quiet, they wouldn't let us out. So we started working for the underground Jewish school, sort of making splash, making noise, being a nuisance. And actually, that was a small group of people that they got rid of. In 81, they had something, I don't know, congress or something in Moscow, and the whole group of people who was teaching at this school was let to go. So we were among them. We demonstrated, we were going out with slogans, let us go, and they did. And after that, it was pretty much closed. So we were the last small wave of this immigration that started in the 70s.
Weren't you afraid to demonstrate and to make splashes, as you said it?
Yeah, of course, we were sort of desperate at the time. We knew we could go either to Siberia for 10 years or they will let us out, but there was no other way. I don't know if I was afraid. I don't know. I think we wanted to go so much that we were sort of, we just knew we had to do something. But yeah, they tried to intimidate us. They were sort of, they would sometimes come to this school and arrest a couple of people, then let them out. It was dangerous, but it was a sort of calculated risk. I knew they wouldn't let us go without it.
Did they intimidate you in any way?
I felt it when I studied Hebrew before, when I would go to the synagogue. Yeah, some people would come and say something nasty or follow me. That happened.
Would you describe to me the situation in the 70s in the Soviet Union? What was it like?
I guess growing up in my family, I was a dissident from the beginning. My parents never were believers or party members. So in my family, it was pretty open what they think about regime. And when I was 13, I was offered to become a Komsomol member, and I decided I won't do it. I just won't do it. So they said, "Oh, you're such a good A student and such a good person. Why don't you become a Komsomol member?" I said, I don't think I'm mature enough for that. So I sort of used their phraseology. And they were, "No, you are mature to be in a Komsomol." No, I'm not. So I decided to resist it. I guess it's in my character. I don't know. I guess I'm this individualist. And as for life in the Soviet Union, I don't know. Have you lived there in the 70s? Do you remember it under Brezhnev? Oh, there was no food, no clothes, nothing. Of course, we all compensated. We had a barter. Like someone gets lemons, you get buckwheat, so you exchange it. So somehow we lived, but it was always my last thought before I go to bed. How am I going to feed my kids? What am I going to give them? Like in the morning, I will take my daughter to school and go and stay in line to get something. Then I will take my son to kindergarten. Second time staying in line. But that was economically, it was one part. All of the situations seemed, I don't know, desperate and grim and morbid. And I sort of started hearing this noise, like an avalanche noise. I knew it's gonna collapse. And I told my husband, "Oh, we have to move out. This system cannot stay too long. It's gonna collapse and it's gonna be scary." So I don't know what he thought, but that was my feeling. I guess premonition that it's gonna happen.
What did you do professionally?
Oh, professionally, I was an artist. I was a professor of art, and I worked for the theater. I was very well off in a way. My family was well off. I was educated, and professionally, I was thriving. But still, I don't know what it was about it. I guess the lies that they would give us. You know, we're all suffering for the name of the bright future, which wasn't coming for some reason. As we were moving forward, it was getting further and further away from us. And of course, every ideology and every political regime is lying to people. I mean, it's inevitable. Somehow it seemed so unique for the Soviet Union, all of this utopia, and of course the history. The history not just of a country, but of my family, the whole family. I recently finished a memoir, which I'm publishing. I would say 11 people in my family were killed in Stalin's camps. No, it's a mixture of Stalin's and Hitler's camps. So that's something. So my grandmother was killed in 1937. And that, of course, just that alone scared me somehow. I thought they arrested this woman who had 3 kids. They might arrest me for nothing. Who cares that I have 3 kids or I didn't do anything wrong? They can do it in this country. So growing up with this idea, of course, I was a dissident and always wanted to immigrate. But it was not that I knew where I was going. I knew what I'm leaving behind. I didn't like it there. I didn't know where I'm going. It's like, we had no idea. We always lied about, other countries and other regimes, and we thought, oh, it's just the opposite of what they say, which is not true, of course. We were like jumping in this water without knowing where we were going. And it's funny, I had to get, at that time you had to sign all your papers, including the manager of the building, Dom Uprav, had to sign it. So this nice woman asked me, "Where are you going?" I said, "Maybe to the United States." She said, "Have you been there?" I said, "Never." "How come are you going there? Do you know if it's better there? Is it good? Why don't you go and see how they live and then move?" And of course, no one was traveling except for some selected people, who were allowed to travel. Of course, it was a strange idea that you can go and see. And I guess maybe later on, and in the normal situation in a normal country, that's how people move. But not for us. We were just refugees. We left without money, without possessions, without knowing where we are going, without jobs. Just left.
Professionally, you were so successful in Russia. What did you dislike so much about your life?
Let me tell you, first, of course, when you are professionally successful in Russia, you think, oh, I'm going to be professionally successful anywhere, because we got really a very good education. And, and we worked on a high level. And in a way, it's true, Of course, artist is not an engineer. I'm sure Russian engineers came here and got very good jobs. For an artist, it's a little different. I guess lots of it was an illusion and hope, which people tend to have. You think, oh, I'm so successful here, I'm going to be even more successful in the other country. And what you call success in Russia is not necessarily what you call success there. like one of my jobs was I was an art director for Tarkovsky, for Andrei Tarkovsky, for his only production in the theater, Hamlet. I don't know if you're aware who Andrei Tarkovsky is. Of course, working for him was an amazing thing, working with him. But it was almost suicidal in Russia, working with Tarkovsky. How much resistance to it there was, how much we were not given a stage. Everyone was opposed. You know, he was himself this director who was no, and the Russian government, of course, was always trying to disrupt his projects. So, yes, I was working for him, but I could see how he was not given, you know, what he was supposed to be as being this brilliant director. And it reflected on me too, how hard it is in Russia to work if you want to do something honest and not necessarily what's required by the government.
What do you mean? How would they require that?
He was invited by Mark Zakharov, but then somehow all the directors were against him being there, so everything was done to disrupt this production. And I was working on the costumes, and Hamlet is a huge production, so it was 150 costumes. And being a movie director, Tarkovsky required an accuracy in every detail of the costume, which of course for the stage it doesn't matter, but lace, butter, so it was a huge project doing all of this. So we left for the summer, we came back, they said there was a fire. Before the fire, and all of your costumes are gone. What was it? An organized fire? I don't know, it's just one example how difficult it was. We were not giving a stage for rehearsals. The costumes were all damaged or burned in a fire. And then we had a premiere. We had showed it 2 times, and it was banned. Who, why? You know, after almost 2 years of work, you feel like, oh my God, you know, all my work is in vain. Somehow everyone in Moscow saw it in these 2 evenings, or at least heard about it because of his name. But, you know, lots of things were like this. They didn't make sense. But I didn't know how it's going to be here. Of course, here I also encountered lots of interesting situations and people who try to control my work and they know nothing about it. But, you know, I guess it's not just typical for Russia. It's typical for every country.
Did Jews have it more difficult than others?
Did they? I guess they do. I guess they do. Of course, you know, we sort of go around and we know people and we have connections and we have our parents and a group of people. But yes, you know, it was really hard to get into university, you know that.
Why?
Why? Because there was a quota. Like, I don't know what was the percentage of Jews they will accept. 0, 2%, or whatever percentage it was. So it did make it more difficult. So you really had to study hard. It had this good effect. You really had to be an A student, be brilliant, and then you can make it. Then you can get into university. And I remember I was taking, you know, there to get into university, you take a test. And that was in a history of the Communist Party. And for some reason, that was very hard for me to memorize. Maybe it didn't make much sense to me. And I was answering the question, whatever it was. And I can see that the guy who is asking me, you know, the guy who was giving me a test, I guess one of the professors, he's looking at me like this. And the more I talk, the more he's looking at me, his eyes are opening. And he's asking me, how do you know that? And I'm like, what have I said wrong? Or you know, I don't know. I guess it was going somewhere and I didn't know what I was talking about. And he looked at me, he said, but this is from unpublished theses of Central Committee. And I said, yeah, but I know it. And of course, I didn't know what I was talking about. So he already started giving me like 5, which is A. And he's like, he half wrote it and he said, of course you are in Komsomol. I said, unfortunately not. And he's like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm giving her 5A and she's not in Komsomol and she's a Jew. But he had to finish it. And he said, you know, it's such loss that you're not in the Komsomol. I said, yes, I know.
When did you first learn that you were Jewish?
You know, I was almost 7. I never ever knew about it, although I have it in my birth certificate, but I guess I never looked at it. And what happened, you know, outside we all heard those words like kike, dirty kike. So my brother called me a kike as we were fighting, and my mom said, don't say that. And she told us that we are Jews or Jewish, and I was so upset. And I said, what can we do to change it? I don't want to be. And she said, nothing you can do. That was like hubris, the moment when I realized there's something you can't change, no matter how good you are.
What were your parents like?
My father was a professor of physics, and my mom was educated as an engineer, and then she learned Japanese, and she was translating scientific information. And on top of being professor of physics, my father worked on the H-bomb. So we were sort of privileged because of that. So he worked with Sakharov and Hariton, with all this group of people. We didn't know about it. My brother heard through the doorknob.
What did he hear?
My father came back. He went to somewhere, Arctic Sea, to see the explosion. And he was telling my mom about it, and my brother just heard through the doorknob and told me. That was a shock. But he would often go, and I would ask him, where are you going? And he said, oh, I can tell you. So we didn't know where and why he's disappearing for months and months.
Where did he go? Were those nuclear tests?
You know, to Kazakhstan, wherever they had those explosions, tries, I don't know. Tests, yeah.
Was your family religious?
Not at all, of course. Not my parents, no. Not even, I don't think my grandparents, who were all educated people, no. None of them. No. You know, as I was writing about my family, and even before that, I realized that once a year, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, would start calling my mom, very agitated. I'm looking for a fish. I'm looking for the right fish. And I was like, Mom, what is that, a right fish? And she would never explain me. She said, oh, grandfather and his fish. Of course, he was looking for kosher fish. But I didn't know. So then he'll call, I found the right fish. Okay. So he found the right fish. And before that, he was making wine, some kosher wine from raisins. So I would go to his place and see this huge bottle of some horrible wine that he was making. And we would always have matzah. But that's pretty much the only thing, you know. Where we lived, it was, there were 2 scientific institutes, you know, one of chemical physics and another one, Kapitsa Institute of Theoretical Physics. All of the people were Jewish. Now that I look back, almost 90% of the people were Jewish. So at the time of a Passover, a small like SUV comes and the woman will run and give us all of us matzah. I don't know where it was coming from. I don't know who was making it, but my parents would always take 2 boxes for us and for grandfathers. So one day we will be invited for this big dinner with gefilte fish on a plate and matzah and I don't know what, but not a word was spoken. I didn't know what was happening. And there were 3 kids, 3 of us, my brother, me, and my cousin, no one would explain us what it was. And we were bored, we'll go under the table. But later on, when I was invited to Passover dinner, I identified, I knew I was already at the Passover dinner. So he was celebrating silent Passover without explaining. And that's a phenomenon that goes back to Spain. Jews in Spain would do that. And I realized that that was his resistance, the silent Passover, and that all of us were there. Of course, he was, as a young man, he went to art school in Odessa, and he became an anarchist. So I can imagine that all his life he was, he wasn't religious. But I guess in the older age, he cared for it, maybe. So that's pretty much the only encounter that I had with Judaism. But even that is nice. But why do you think we had silent Passover? Why?
So you're saying that not a word was said about the holiday?
Why didn't we have all the Haggadah reading and everything? Why?
So you're saying not a word was said about the Haggadah, nothing like this? But what was supposed to be different? It wasn't supposed to be silent, right?
Because if someone finds out, the kids will tell, everyone will lose a job, I guess. Some of the family members were party members, so that's why.
It was not safe.
Yeah, who would prove it's Passover? Who can prove it is a Passover Seder? You can't, because not a word was spoken.
Just fish.
Just fish, yeah. Yeah, just the right kind of fish, I guess.
Do you feel that you are becoming more religious?
I wouldn't call myself a religious person. I'm not an atheist, of course, but no, I would say I'm a high holiday Jew. I go during high holiday and I have Passover Seder in my house. That's pretty much it. You can't be raised without religion and then accept it. I know I'm Jewish, and I would call it culturally Jewish, maybe, because I'm writing some articles, say, on some poetry of Pasternak and his connection to Judaism. I've written some of those. So it's very interesting for me to find how people that claim that they are not Jewish, or clandestine Jews, or secret Jews, or whatever, Jews, still have it in their poetry, in their writing, or, somehow they accepted it early. But Pasternak, I think, had done it consciously, because I wrote some research on his poem written in 57, when he already claimed that he is a Christian, and yet it's based on Judaism, and I proved it. So that is an interesting thing, and I guess it comes from my childhood, when things were forbidden. You knew you're Jewish, but you were not raised Jewish, you were not allowed to practice, it was all behind the scene, but you knew it. So how do these people live? How do they express it?
Do you think there is a parallel with Brodsky here?
I don't know his poetry much. But I don't think so. I don't think Brodsky was raised as a Jew. I think Pasternak knew probably much more than he even claimed that he did. I don't think Brodsky knew anything. Brodsky is just a passport Jew. He's not by culture. But again, I don't know.
But then again, who of us is? You just described a religious society where it was not safe even to read from the Haggadah.
Yeah, but say Mandelstam or Babel or Pasternak, they had a chance. These are the people that I'm interested. How much of it is still there? None of us, of course. No, we were not raised with anything except for this silent Passover. I have nothing to cling.
Is there anything about this in your paintings behind you?
You know, it's not up to me to decide. I think someone who research on my paintings maybe will find it. But yes, this right kind of, it became an expression of my family. You know, like my grandfather used to say, I can't find the right kind of. We always say that. Even my kids say, oh, this is the right kind of this, which means it's kosher. So I guess this expression became our little family language.
Let's forget about Judaism or Christianity, that Brodsky became Christian. Is there...
I think it was neither nor. I don't know. But that's me. That's what I think.
What would you say about spirituality in the Soviet Union and here?
You know, spirituality for me is sort of a bad word. Here it's associated with this New Age religion, and I always claim I'm not a spiritual person. If you mean art, the prestige of art, or education, or reading, or music, of course it's much more prestigious. You know, it's much more was much more prestigious in the Soviet Union to be educated. Here, who cares? You know, here, who cares if you read anything or not? There was sort of a mandatory knowledge, but of course I come from a professor's family, so I can't say what it was for everybody. For me, yes, I had to read pretty much every classical novel. You know, we had a huge library. We had probably 4,000 books in my apartment. And I pretty much was just devouring books as I was growing up. So for me, it was normal. And I had friends from, you know, the same circle. So for us, it was, you know, it was just a shame to admit, oh, you haven't read this, or you haven't, no, you know. You couldn't be part of the circle and not know. Here, you know, as my daughter say, how am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to know? And why is she supposed to know? Because there is no, I would say, it's a whole system of education in Russia. You sort of, when you're educated, you are given like a whole grid of compartments. So as later on, as you read on your own or study something, you know where to put it, to which compartment. And that's a difference of, I think education in Russia was very, you know, based on European tradition and very methodical. Like if we studied history, it was like 6 years of history or physics or this. Here you can go through school and never even take geometry or physics or anything. It's very different. It's a modernity. So there, I think we had more respect for tradition, if you call it, and the past and culture. If you call it spirituality, I think it was a very spiritual society. And in a way, even not materialistic society, because success never measured in what you're paid, as it is here.
Aside from being cultured and well-educated, and aside from non-existing religion, was there anything spiritual in the Soviet Union?
It has nothing to do with the regime of the Soviet Union, but it has everything to do with the tradition of Russian culture, which somehow survived with all the offenses of the Soviet government and all the arrests and everything. There was still this very good tradition of education and respect for the culture in Russia. But again, I want to stress that I come from this background. You know, all of my uncles, aunts, my parents, they were all professors, all educated class, and in this circle, you know, education had a very high prestige. So that's what I can say. You know, Russia, because it was a very closed society. No one could move, no one could immigrate for a long time, at least for my generation and parents. It created a very interesting phenomenon of knowing people for generation, these very strong connections, very strong friendship, almost like a very tight circle of people who were very supportive because regime was so difficult and non-supportive. So people replace it with this, with friendships and support of each other. So in a way, it was a very cozy situation for us. You know, we all knew each other, and we trusted each other, and we knew that our parents knew their parents, and maybe even grandparents. So it created this very steady society, which I don't even think is possible here because of the mobility. So that, I think, was very characteristic for Russia. But specifically for Moscow, because you know how difficult, I don't know if you're a Moscowite, you're not. And you know you probably couldn't move to Moscow and get a permit to live there.